Before we start, a quick note about what this channel is and what it isn't. This isn't a recap channel, and it's not a highlight reel. We're here for the parts of Panem that happen after the cameras turn away, the systems behind the games, the contracts hidden inside victory, the lives that keep unfolding long after the anthem ends. Each video on this channel is built to slow things down, to follow the logic the capital relies on, the details it hopes you won't connect, and the people who live with the consequences year after year. If that's the kind of Hunger Games analysis you're looking for, you're in the right place. Subscribing just means you'll keep a seat here when we move on to the next story. Now, let's start where Panem always wants you to stop paying attention. You remember the glass reaping bull, all those tiny white slips. But here's the real question. Is the most lethal rule in the Hunger Games the one with the mutts and fire, or the one that forces starving 12-year-olds to buy extra entries into that bowl just to keep their families alive? At face value, the games start when Caesar Flickerman smiles and the tributes rise into the arena. That's the image you hold on to. The cornucopia, the countdown, the bloodbath. You think the danger begins when the gong sounds, but for most of Panem, the games begin the moment a child walks up to a peacekeeper's table and signs for tesserae. This is where we talk about the rule you probably pushed to the back of your mind. Tesserae. 1 year's worth of grain and oil for one person in exchange for one extra entry of your name in the reaping. Sounds simple, right? A cruel bargain, but at least it's 1-to-1. Except that's not how the math works. In District 12, when Katniss turns 12, her name goes in once automatically. That's the baseline every eligible child has, but when she takes tesserae for herself, her mother and Prim, that's not just 3 extra slips for that year. Each of those tesserae entries stays in the pool every single year until she turns 19 and ages out. The capital calls it charity. In reality, it's compound interest on fear. There is a lot to uncover here, because the rule doesn't reset. Gale is the perfect example. By the time he's 18, he has 42 entries in that bowl, not because he's more worthy of honor, but because his family is hungrier. Every bad winter, every failed mine shift, every empty cupboard becomes another reason to gamble with his life, and the odds never unstack. So when Effie Trinket chirps about "may the odds be ever in your favor," you already know whose odds are actually being engineered. The richer families in a district can afford not to take tesserae. Their children's names sit in the bowl a handful of times. Poor families sign again and again until the reaping bowl is basically a map of class. That part matters because it exposes the capital's favorite contradiction. On camera, they sell tesserae as a fair opportunity, a safety net, a promise that no one in Panem has to starve. Off camera, the rule quietly converts hunger into higher death probabilities. It's a slow-motion death sentence disguised as welfare. So here's the real question we're going to cover in this series. If the games are already rigged years before the arena, what other quiet rules are bending survival long before a tribute ever sees the cornucopia? If tesserae turns dinner into a lottery ticket, what does that say about every other choice the capital offers? Because if you're already playing the games when you're 12 and just trying to eat, then stepping onto that train isn't the beginning. It's the point where you finally notice you've been playing all along. Winning isn't the end. Why the rules never let you go. So if the games have already started before the train, what happens when you win? You step off another train? Into Victor's village? Perfect lawns? Empty streets? A mansion with hot water and full power waiting just for you. At face value, it looks like the capital finally kept a promise. You survived, so now you get peace, safety, and escape from the games. Why does every part of your new life still read like a rule book? Back then, in the early games, the terror was loud. Public executions, starving districts, children dragged away on stage with no volunteers to soften the blow. Now, the terror is quiet. It's the sound of sprinklers in Victor's village, while the rest of your district still lines up for tesserae. The contrast feels huge, but it's the same machine, upgraded. You're not just a survivor, you're a contract. Winning doesn't cancel your relationship with the games, it deepens it. You're legally bound to mentor every new tribute from your district, year after year forced to watch kids die in an arena you supposedly escaped. You're required to attend capital parties, perform a talent, sit for interviews where your trauma becomes primetime entertainment. That part matters because it shows victory isn't an ending, it's onboarding. So why does Panem need such intricate rules for one person who already did the impossible? Why is victory tied to lifelong obligations instead of release? Why is Haymitch, decades later, still being shipped to the capital, still drinking himself numb in a house he can't really leave? The reason is simple and cruel. One victor isn't mercy. One victor is marketing. We're going to cover how victors become walking advertisements for compliance. Every camera shot of their luxury home says to the districts, "See, the games can work for you." Children grow up staring at those houses on the hill, told that if they're strong enough, charming enough, lucky enough, they can earn their way out of the mines or the fields. Hope becomes a sales pitch. And the rules you remember, the flashy ones, are designed to distract you. The two-victor twist for star-crossed lovers, the arena mutts, the sudden weather shifts when the game makers get bored, those are spectacle. Meanwhile, the truly vicious rules are buried in sponsorship systems and post-games contracts. Sponsors can only send gifts through official channels at inflated prices the capital controls, turning your survival into a pay-per-view event. Even after you win, those same channels decide which victor gets screen time, which story gets rewritten, which rebel gets silenced. This is where we talk about Victor's village itself. Those beautiful houses, they're written into the rules as part of the punishment system, placed apart from the district, elevated, visible but untouchable. You're rewarded and isolated in the same breath. So what happens when the capital needs that reward to hurt even more? There is a lot to uncover here. Our angle, reading the Hunger Games as a rigged contract. So here's the twist. Those houses on the hill aren't a glitch in the Hunger Games system. They're the point. Because here's the real question. What if the most sadistic part of the games isn't the killing at all, but the paperwork that makes the killing look civilized? Every stage of this thing is written down somewhere, reaping procedures, training schedules, arena interventions. Victor obligations, it reads less like a sport and more like a 500-page contract you never got to sign. That part matters because contracts sound fair. They sound mutual. But in Panem, every rule is drafted to benefit one party, the capital. You, as a tribute or a victor, or even just a kid in their legal drama. So from here on, we're going to cover the games as if we're reading the fine print. Who profits from each rule? Who pays in blood? And what illusion does each clause create so no one revolts too early? Take tesserae. At face value, it's a humanitarian policy, extra grain and oil so your family doesn't starve. The hidden clause, every portion costs you one more entry in the reaping, And those entries don't disappear. They stack year after year until the odds are a statistical death sentence for the poorest kids. The capital gets to say, "We offered help." The district pays with its children. That's not charity. That's predatory lending. The same contract logic runs through the arena. Game makers are explicitly allowed to intervene if the games get dull. Fire to flush you out. Floods to herd you together. Mutts when the narrative needs a villain. On paper, it's about maintaining order. In practice, it's a clause that says the house can rewrite the laws of nature whenever ratings dip. Even the mercies are rigged, sponsors supposedly a lifeline. But gifts only move through official capital channels with inflated prices and delivery timing they control. A perfect rule if you want to monetize desperation and punish tributes who aren't entertaining enough. Training scores work the same way. One number, given in a locked room, that quietly decides who gets parachutes and who dies before they step off the train. And then there's Victor's Village, the crown jewel of false promises. On the contract, it's payment in full. Wealth, safety from the reaping, a permanent escape from the games. In reality, it's surveillance housing with better wallpaper. You're exempt from district labor, sure. But now you're bound to mentor future tributes, attend capital events, invent some talent to perform on command, and smile through the threat that your family can be targeted if you step out of line. This is where we talk about the promise versus the reality. Two victors rule? Sounds merciful until you realize it's a built-in clause for emotional torture, used once to weaponize Katniss and Peter's relationship, then yanked away in the quarter quell to prove that even written rules mean nothing when Snow needs them broken. And the worst part is, the contract doesn't end when the arena shuts down. Victory tours, forced mentoring, unspoken services for capital elites, and the quiet understanding that your surviving loved ones are collateral if you stop playing along. The games don't start at the countdown, and they don't end with a cannon. They start the moment your name goes into a rigged lottery, and they only really end when the system that wrote those rules burns. So if Victor's Village is just one clause in this giant predatory agreement, what happens when the capital decides to weaponize the fine print even further? Tonight's game plan, from Reaping Bowl to Victor's contract. So to untangle that fine print, we need a game plan. If Victor's Village is just one clause, what does the rest of the capital's invisible contract actually look like from your first reaping to your last breath as a victor? This is where we talk about the full pipeline, because the games are a system, not a single event. First, we're going to cover the pre-games rules, the stuff that decides who even ends up on that stage. We'll start with tesserae, the quiet little rule that forces starving kids to buy food with extra entries in the reaping. 1 year of grain and oil equals one more slip with your name on it. And those slips don't disappear next year. That part matters because it means Gale's family isn't just unlucky. We can actually run the tesserae math on him and see how the odds deliberately crush poor districts long before a countdown clock appears. From there, we'll move into the training restrictions and the way the careers bend those rules without technically breaking them. Why can some kids train their whole lives in Districts 1, 2, and 4 while 12 is told that even snares are suspicious? At face value, everyone gets 3 days in the training center, the same stations, the same ban on weapons outside supervised sessions. But here's the real question. Why design a rule set that pretends to be fair while openly rewarding the districts that already have combat culture built in? Then we hit the arena itself, the part you remember visually, but not always legally. We'll break down the rule, that game makers can intervene whenever the games get dull, which is capital code for set the forest on fire, flood the plains, or drop mutts in the dark. We'll line up the book and movie versions of those manipulations and ask why the films soften some of the cruelest details, especially around mutt design and how blatantly the environment is rigged. After that, sponsorships, the whole survival economy. Some tributes are effectively dead before they step off the train because a quiet rule ties sponsor gifts to performance scores and entertainment value. We're going to cover how Katniss and Peter's star-crossed narrative turns into literal currency, and how the almost illegal Nightlock Berries stunt exposes where the Capitol's own rules start to glitch. Then, post-games, the Victor contract. We'll trace Haymitch's story, his arena trick, the Capitol's revenge on his family, and use it to infer the unspoken clauses that keep victors obedient. Mandatory mentoring, forced appearances, threats to your district if you stop playing the role. There is a lot to uncover here about the relationship between reward and punishment. Near the end, we'll pull all those clues together and speculate on the unwritten Capitol rulebook. What secret clauses have to exist to explain why Finnick is trafficked, why Johanna is broken, why Katniss can't simply disappear into her mansion? And through every stage, we'll keep circling back to one question. Why does the Capitol allow any hope at all, tesserae, volunteers, victors, when pure terror would be simpler? By the end, we'll see why that tiny, controlled promise of hope is the sharpest weapon the Capitol ever wrote into law. Welcome to Victor's Village, why this channel obsessively reads the fine print. So when we talk about a little hope as a weapon, this is where we talk about the channel itself. Because around here, we don't just rewatch the cornucopia bloodbath and call it a day. We treat Panem the way the Capitol treats the arena, as a system with rules, pressure points, and tiny clauses in the fine print that decide who lives, who dies, and who gets a mansion on the hill. The focus of this channel is simple on paper and messy in practice. We deep dive into all things Hunger Games, law, world building, political theory, the boring-sounding regulations that secretly change everything. At face value, a rule about tesserae is just extra grain. But once you realize those extra entries stay in the pool every remaining year, you start to see why entire districts feel permanently doomed. If you're new here and you care more about how the reaping math works than who had the best dress in the parade, you're in the right place. If the sentence sponsorship gifts can only be sent through official game maker channels with inflated pricing, makes you go, wait, that means poor tributes are basically dead on arrival. Then you already think the way we do. We're going to cover the big scenes, sure, but always through the question of why the system is built this way. For returning viewers, you know the pattern. This video is part of our ongoing Victor's Village series, where we pretend Panem is a real functioning society with zoning laws, budget meetings, and some very nervous bureaucrats trying to explain to Snow why the training center has banned weapons, but still produces career tributes with perfect scores. There is a lot to uncover here when you stop asking what happened and start asking what would this actually require to run. We've already broken down how the Capitol monetizes survival through sponsors, how the arena rule that lets game makers rewrite the laws of nature turns every tree and cloud into a threat, and how post-games contracts keep every victor on a psychological leash. That part matters because once you see the relationship between each rule and each rebellion, you can't unsee it. So if you want more long-form, analytical, but still fun breakdowns that treat Katniss's plant book and Peter's prosthetic leg with the same seriousness as the Quarter Quell twist, you're invited to join our little village. Think of it as moving into Victor's village without the trauma bill. Here's the real question, though. What does it mean to join anything in a universe built on forced oaths and blood-written promises? The Capital's contracts are forever, the mentor agreements, the media tours, the unspoken threats to your family if you step out of line. Ours is different. Subscribing here isn't a life sentence. It's the one contract in this world you can break whenever you want. No peacekeepers, no reaping bowl, just you choosing to come back the next time we pull apart. Another rule the Capital hoped you wouldn't read too closely. And speaking of rules the Capital hoped you'd ignore, let's go back to where the games really start. Not the arena, but the reaping bowl itself. How the reaping became legalized Russian roulette. The arena has fireballs and mutts. The reaping has math. On paper, it looks simple. Every child in your district, 12 to 18, puts their name in the bowl. 2 names are drawn. At face value, that sounds fair. A lottery. But here's the real question. Why does that fair system just happen to aim itself at the same kids year after year? This is where we talk about age. The second you turn 12, your name goes in once. 13? 3 times. Even if you never touch tesserae, the system quietly turns your birthday into a punishment. By the time you're 18 in a poor district, your name has been in that bowl 7 separate years, stacked on top of each other, while a brand new 12-year-old is only carrying a single slip. Statistically, the older you are, the more doomed you are. That part matters because the Capital sells the games as a consequence for rebellion, but the reaping turns age into a loaded weapon. You survive childhood just long enough to become a better worker, a better provider, and then the odds spike against you, precisely when your family needs you most. Convenient. Now add tesserae. Tesserae is the Capital's cruelest coupon. A year's worth of grain and oil in exchange for 1 extra entry per family member. Not per year. Per year, per person. Compounded for every remaining reaping. We're going to cover Gale as the concrete example because Suzanne Collins does the math for you in the text. By the time we meet him, Gale has taken tesserae for himself and his 3 younger siblings, every eligible year since 12. That's 4 people across multiple years, with each new tesserae entry staying in the bowl until they age out. The result? His name isn't in there a handful of times, it's in there 42 times. Compare that to Peter, the baker's son, never starving, never forced into tesserae. His name is in the bowl the legal minimum, once per year of age, and that's it. Same district, same rules, completely different relationship to risk. So when Effie Trinket pulls a name and chirps about ladies first, the Capital can pretend this is random. Anyone could be chosen. But the economic pressure means the poorest families must literally buy food with extra chances to die. The bowl isn't neutral, it's weighted with hunger. Refusal isn't an option. Attendance at the reaping is mandatory. You dress up in your best, you stand in perfect rows, you stay silent unless prompted. Peacekeepers line the square with guns, not clipboards. You can't refuse tesserae without risking starvation, and you can't refuse the ceremony without risking punishment. So here's the question that blows the Capital's whole story apart. If the games are about punishing rebels, why is the system engineered to target the poorest, least powerful children instead of anyone who actually chose to fight? And if the reaping is already rigged by hunger and age, what do you think happens when we move to a rule the Capital can change in real time, in the arena itself? The training center trap, rules that decide who dies early. When we move to a rule the Capital can change in real time, in the arena itself, before we even get there, the system does something quieter. It walks you through the front doors of the training center. At face value, this place sounds almost fair. Every tribute from every district gets the same week of group training. You rotate through stations, you're not allowed to use real weapons on each other, and when it's over, you each perform privately for the game makers. Same room, same time frame, same opportunity. That's the promise on paper. But here's the real question. If the rules are so equal, why do you already know which kids are going to die early the moment those training scores flash on screen? This is where we talk about the number 1 to 12. Your entire skill set, your entire survival potential, boiled down to a single digit that the capital uses as shorthand for your worth. Sponsors see that number, the audience sees that number, and suddenly you're not a person anymore. You're a betting line. A 3 from District 10? Cute story. A 10 from District 2. Now that's an investment. That part matters because in these games, money is oxygen. Low score means fewer gifts. Less medicine, no food when the arena turns on you. You walk in already labeled dead on arrival. So why do some tributes almost always land at the top of that scale? The reason is baked in years before their name is ever read. Career districts train illegally from childhood. They grow up throwing spears in organized academies, studying past arenas, building a relationship with weapons they're technically not supposed to touch. Then, at 18, they volunteer with polished combat skills that translate into impressive performances and high scores. The capital pretends this is organic. It isn't. It's a pipeline. And the trap doesn't stop with training. While you're processing the fact that your number might have just killed you, you're legally required to participate in the parade, the makeovers, the interviews. Capital spectacle isn't a perk. It's mandatory. Even if you're 12, even if you're shaking, you get paraded in flaming costumes, scrubbed and polished, then pushed in front of Caesar Flickerman to charm the same audience that will cheer when you bleed out at the cornucopia. So which rule is actually more sadistic? Forcing kids to fight to the death, or forcing them to perform, be scored, and be judged as entertainment first? There is a lot to uncover here, because once you see how the training center quietly decides who lives long enough to suffer, you're ready to look at the next level of control, the rule that lets the game makers rewrite the entire world you're dropped into. No's blueprint, turning mass execution into primetime TV. The rule that lets game makers rewrite the entire world you're dropped into didn't appear out of nowhere. It's part of a much bigger project, turning mass execution into a season of must-watch television. Back in the very first Hunger Games, after the Dark Days, there wasn't much of a blueprint. The capital had just crushed the districts. The treaty was signed, and the games were closer to public hangings in a pit than a polished broadcast. No sponsors, barely any cameras, just punishment. So why change that? Why not keep it raw and terrifying forever? Why start adding rules and scores and contracts? This is where we talk about Coriolanus Snow. In the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, you see him as a hungry academy student interning for a chaotic early games. Tributes are kept in a zoo cage. The arena is a ruined sports stadium. Half the deaths come from disease and structural collapse, not strategy. At face value, that should be enough horror to keep the districts in line. But Snow notices something crucial. No one in the capital really cares. Ratings are low. The violence is messy, random, and worst of all for him, forgettable. Here's the real question. If fear alone fades, what actually keeps power in place year after year? Snow's answer is rules plus spectacle. A system that promises the same thing every time. One reaping, one arena. One victor. We're going to cover the specific rules in other sections, but zoom out for a second. The reaping procedures, the tesserae that quietly stack odds against starving kids, the age brackets, the mandatory parades and interviews, those aren't just logistics. They turn the games into ritual. That part matters because rituals feel inevitable. If you're in a district, it stops being the capital might kill us and becomes these are the rules of the world. There is a lot to uncover here. Snow needs the capital to see a glamorous event with clear storylines, and he needs the districts to see fate, not choice. So he standardizes training days, performance scores, and even those glossy makeover segments. You can't refuse the stylist. You can't skip Caesar Flickerman. The law says you will be turned into a character first and a corpse second. Look at the arenas. Early on, they're just locations. Under snow, they become engineered ecosystems with the explicit rule that game makers can alter weather, terrain, and mutts whenever the games require it. That's not random cruelty, it's a guarantee. The capital gets constant drama. The districts get proof that even nature obeys the capital. And when you win, you sign victor contracts, mentor forever, attend parties on command. On paper, those rules are rewards. In reality, they're chains that never come off. So why keep adding more and more structure? Because every new rule is a pressure valve. Sponsorship gifts to give a tiny bit of hope. Victor's Village to offer a tiny promise of escape. Quarter quells to reset the board when patterns get dangerous. Each one bleeds off just enough anger to keep the system from exploding. The real problem for Snow is what happens when one rule, just one, starts to backfire. The birth of Victor's Village, a reward that isn't really yours. So when does the mansion show up? Because the early games don't have it. You win, you go home, you get a little money and a lifetime of nightmares. That's it. No gated community, no perfect lawns, no Victor's Village. And here's the real question. Why does that suddenly change after the 10th Hunger Games? Back then, the games are barely holding on. Ratings are low, districts are sullen, tributes are more resigned than engaged. Snow is still climbing, watching what works and what doesn't. So why the shift from pure terror to terror with a real estate bonus? Why add a mansion to the end of a murder maze? This is where we talk about Snow's favorite tool, hope. After the 10th Games, as the capital refines the system, Victor's Village appears as a deliberate invention. It's not nostalgia architecture, it's policy. The reason is simple but cruel. If you want kids to train, volunteer, and perform, you can't just threaten them with death. You have to promise them something beautiful on the other side. At face value, the promise is incredible. Win the games, and you never work another day in the mines, the fields. The factories, you get a mansion with hot water, full power, and more rooms than your whole family knows what to do with. In District 12, it's the nicest place anyone has ever seen, with white painted houses and stocked pantries sitting a world away from the seam's coal dust. Children can point at it, parents can whisper, "If you win, that's where we'll live." But look at where it is. That part matters because the village is always close enough to be visible, but far enough to be separate. In 12, it's on a hill above town, elevated, literally. Victors look down on their own district and their district looks up at them, but there's a gap you can't casually cross. You're out of the slums, but you're also out of your old support network. Friends, neighbors, even extended family. They don't live next door anymore. And ownership? That's the quiet twist. Victors don't really own those homes. They're effectively on a lifelong lease from the capital. The house is conditional on behavior. You mentor tributes when they tell you. You get on the train when they call. You answer the phone when Snow's office rings. You smile in interviews. You sell your talent. You play your role in the narrative. The relationship is landlord and tenant, not hero and reward. So why build all this instead of just enforcing obedience with more peacekeepers? Because Snow understands something brutal. Fear alone makes people freeze. Hope makes them move. Victor's village turns the games into a twisted career path. It whispers that horror is a tunnel you can walk through as long as you believe there's a dream house waiting at the end, until the capital proves that even that promise can be revoked. Why Snow needed volunteers. The psychology behind choice. So if the promise of safety can be revoked at any time, why did Snow bother with the illusion of choice in the first place? Why write a rule that lets a child step forward and say, "I volunteer"? Why open that door at all if your entire system runs on fear? At face value, the volunteer rule sounds almost humane. Someone braver can take your place. A sibling can be spared. But here's the real question. Who actually has the luxury to treat the games as a decision, not the starving 12-year-old with tesserae entries stacked against them? The volunteer rule was never built for District 12. It was engineered for Districts 1, 2, and 4. This is where we talk about Snow's better class of tributes. The capital doesn't just want kids who can swing a sword. It wants performers, charismatic, photogenic, trained from childhood in private academies that totally aren't official training centers, because that would technically break the rules. Career districts raise children on weapons drills, arena simulations, and past Victor highlight reels. By the time the reaping happens, there's already a queue of teenagers who've been told their whole life that this is their shot at a mansion, fame, and a permanent escape from the reaping. There is a lot to uncover here about how volunteering rewrites the story. Without it, every reaping is pure abduction. The capital is murdering our children. With it, Snow can claim something else. Our bravest and strongest choose to represent us. That part matters because it shifts the relationship between the districts and the games from pure terror to twisted aspiration. Parents can tell themselves their child wanted this. Mentors can pretend they're coaching a willing athlete, not a condemned kid. In the career districts, volunteering becomes so normalized it's practically a profession. You train, you wait. You step forward the second a weaker name is called. It's a promotion, not a punishment. The reaping turns into a stage where the right tribute gets to claim their role in front of cheering crowds. You can see how that pairs perfectly with Victor's village, the mansion at the end of the bloodbath, the proof that the system works if you're strong enough. So why allow any of this if the stated goal is fear? Because fear alone makes people hide. Snow needs movement. He needs the districts to participate in their own oppression. Volunteers give the games a thin layer of consent, just enough to confuse the moral lines. Is the capital killing you, or did you choose glory and lose? When that question stays muddy, rebellion gets harder. And when we get to the quarter quell rule twist, you'll see what happens the moment that illusion of chosen glory collides with the reality that no one is ever truly safe. From starving kids to show ponies, how the rules rewrite motivation. That illusion of chosen glory doesn't just shape individual decisions. It rewires entire districts. Back in the early games, most tributes are exactly what the name implies, tributes. Random kids, malnourished, traumatized, dragged from the reaping stage straight into a death pageant they don't understand. You get those early broadcasts where a boy from a coal district can't even hold a spear correctly, or a girl from a fishing district flinches every time a camera moves. They're victims first, contestants second. Now jump to the era of career tributes. Kids from 1, 2, and 4 who have been training since they could walk, who treat the parade as their runway and the interviews as their audition for capital stardom. At face value, that looks like a cultural quirk. Oh, those career districts are just bloodthirsty. But here's the real question. Why did the culture bend that way in the first place? This is where we talk about the rule stack. Victor's Village, sponsorships and volunteers aren't random perks. They're a pipeline. The capital says, win and your entire life changes. Mansion, food, safety from the reaping for you and your future children. Your district gets celebrations, extra rations, a brief sense of hope. That part matters because it quietly tells every ambitious parent in a career district, if we train our kids, if we treat the games as a sport, we might actually beat this system. Then, add sponsorship rules. Training scores are broadcast. Higher scores mean more sponsors. More sponsors mean medicine, weapons, water when the arena turns into a desert overnight because the game makers are legally allowed to rewrite the weather mid-fight. So who does the rulebook reward? The tributes who already arrive polished, telegenic, and lethal. The ones whose districts invested in private training gyms and illegal weapons practice. Over time, the pattern is obvious. Districts that treat the games as sacred war produce terrified martyrs. Districts that treat them as professional sport produce victors. Each win buys another house in Victor's Village, another mentor with insider knowledge of the training center, another year where capital cameras linger on your district's proud tradition instead of its poverty. And suddenly you've got a feedback loop. One victor brings prestige, which attracts more capital attention, which brings more sponsorship money, which funds better training, which produces the next victor. The relationship between cruelty and reward becomes self-sustaining. You don't need peacekeepers to force kids to volunteer when their older cousin is a local celebrity living in a mansion on the hill. But feedback loops cut both ways. If the rulebook quietly rewards districts that play along, it just as quietly punishes the ones that refuse. What happens if your district is too poor to train, too traumatized to celebrate, too stubborn to turn its children into show ponies? What if your only volunteer in decades is a girl with a burning loaf of bread in her past and no interest in being the capital's champion? We're going to cover what that slow-motion punishment looks like when we zoom in on District 12, and why by the time Katniss steps forward, the game has already been rigged against her for generations. District 12. What happens when no one volunteers? District 12 answers that question by refusing the premise. In the career districts, volunteering is a performance. In 12, the absence of volunteers is the point. The reaping isn't a festival, it's a funeral you're forced to attend. People wear their best clothes, but not to impress the capital. It's because this might be the last time they see their children standing on 2 feet. At face value, the rules are the same here as everywhere else. 2 tributes, ages 12 to 18, names pulled at random. Tesserae available if you're starving. But here's the real question. What happens when almost everyone is starving? In District 12, tesserae isn't a desperate exception. It's standard practice. Every extra sack of grain is another entry in the reaping. And those entries don't disappear. They stack. They follow you. year after year. So the poorest kids in the seam are buried under slips of paper, while wealthier merchant children sit in the square with only a handful. Same rule, completely different weapon. That part matters because it shows you how the capital uses a choice to hard-code class into the odds. You're not just hungry, you're statistically doomed. This is where we talk about preparation, or the lack of it. Career districts treat the games as a career track, informal training from childhood, weapons handled in secret, mentors who actually mentor. In 12, you're legally forbidden to train with weapons, and there's no black market arena class behind the bakery. The closest thing Katniss has is hunting illegally beyond the fence, and even that is punishable by death if the peacekeepers feel motivated that day. And peacekeeper enforcement does feel different here. You see it in the way they crack down on tesserae fraud, public floggings, the electric fence suddenly humming to life the moment Katniss starts slipping through too easily. The message is clear. You can't escape the system, only make yourself more edible to it. Then there's sponsorship. In the training center, the careers show off polished skills. Sponsors line up to invest. District 12 tributes arrive underfed, undercoached, and overshadowed. Haymitch is drunk, their scores are modest, and the capital audience reads them as background characters. Some tributes are already dead the moment the sponsor screen lights up. From Katniss's perspective, the games are never a promise of glory. They're a rigged death sentence broadcast in HD. She doesn't dream of becoming a victor with a sparkling interview segment. She dreams of never being called at all. When she hunts, it's not to build combat skills, it's to keep Prim from taking more tesserae. And here's the cruel twist. In a no-volunteer district, the reaping rule becomes pure terror. There's no honorable way to opt in, no accepted path to opt out. You can't train your odds up. You can only watch them worsen with every hungry winter. The games don't start on the train. They start the first time your name goes into that bowl. So why does it matter that 12 refuses to play the capital's game? Until Katniss? In a system built to reward engagement, a district that won't produce volunteers is a problem. The moment one finally steps forward, everything shifts. Is this submission to the rules, or the first crack in them? We're going to cover how that single word, I volunteer, rewrites the relationship between District 12, its victors, and the capital's illusion of control. Katniss, the wrong kind of volunteer. Katniss doesn't just step forward. She breaks the script the capital spent decades perfecting. At face value, the volunteer rule looks simple. Someone's name is drawn, someone else can step in. It sounds almost merciful, right? A built-in escape hatch. But here's the real question. Merciful for who? For the terrified kid on stage, or for the capital audience that gets a better story out of it? This is where we talk about the difference between how the rule is supposed to work and what happens in District 12. In the career districts, volunteering is practically a career move. You train for years. Your parents approve. Your entire district nods along because this is the system. You step up, you win, you become a victor, and your district gets food, celebrations, and the promise of protection from future reapings. Volunteering there is rehearsed. It's proud. It's clean. District 12? It's not supposed to produce that kind of tribute. When Prim's name is called, the whole square freezes because the games have finally reached the one person everyone silently hoped would slip through. And then Katniss screams, "I volunteer!" with no training, no plan, no noble speech, just raw panic. The rule, designed to showcase ambition, suddenly broadcasts something much more dangerous. Love strong enough to override fear. There is a lot to uncover here. The emotional cruelty of the reaping isn't just that children are chosen, it's that the system forces everyone around them to do the math in real time. If your sibling is called, do you step forward? If your best friend is sobbing, do you take their place? The capital doesn't need you to volunteer. It needs you to hesitate, to imagine it, to feel that spike of guilt when you don't. That part matters because it turns every reaping into a silent test of loyalty inside each family and each district. And the cameras are ready for it. Notice how fast they close in on Prim, clawing at Katniss, on Gale holding her back, on the crowd's horrified silence. The games don't start in the arena. They start on that stage, in that close-up of a sister realizing she's going to die for someone she loves. For Capital viewers, this is premium content. For Snow, it's proof the system works. Pain converted directly into ratings, into sponsorships, into control. She doesn't smile, doesn't play at glory, doesn't reinforce the idea that becoming a tribute is an honor. Her volunteering exposes the rule's real function. It's not about choice, it's about forcing the worst possible choice into public view. So if one desperate girl from the poorest district can twist a supposedly aspirational rule into a quiet act of defiance, here's the real question. What other rules in the games are waiting to be broken in ways the capital never intended? And what happens when someone pushes the next one too far? The districts we never see, mid-tier rules and quiet compliance. And here's where that question gets even messier. We only ever see one girl from District 12 pull that stunt. What happens to the rules in the districts we barely see at all? At face value, Panem looks simple from your seat in the arena stands. You know 12 is starving, 1 and 2 are polished killers, 11 is tightly controlled, and the capital is drunk on spectacle. But here's the real question. What about the places in between? Districts 5, 6, 9, 10. The mid-tier districts that are never the main story but still send children into the same rigged lottery every year. This is where we talk about narrative bias as a weapon. Collins locks us into Katniss's relationship with the games, which means our camera lingers on coal dust and capital excess, not on power plants or grain silos. There is a lot to uncover here because the rulebook is national, but our point of view is extremely local. You think you know how Panem works, but you really know how it works for one district and a handful of careers. So we go hunting in the scraps of canon, the victor lists, Caesar's commentary, quell footage. We see that District 6 has multiple victors before the second quarter quell. District 5 produces the clever girl who blows the arena's force field. District 10 sends that trampled tribute in the 74th games, but also must have had a victor to mentor him. Statistically, those wins don't happen if absolutely nobody ever trains, ever volunteers, ever makes a quiet deal with the rules. So how do these mid-tier districts probably handle it? You can almost feel a soft version of career culture. Not full-time academies, but older siblings teaching you how to throw a knife behind a slaughterhouse. A peacekeeper who accidentally leaves a spear leaning against the fence. A kid from 5 who studies past games footage the way someone in 12 studies plant books. Volunteering not as a proud tradition, but as a grim calculation when your little sister's tesserae entries are stacked to the ceiling. That part matters because it shows how the same set of rules produces wildly different survival strategies. In 1 and 2, the promise of a victor's village turns the games into a career path. In 12, the reaping is a death sentence you pray to avoid. In a place like 9 or 10, It might be something in between. You don't want the games, but you've seen just enough local victors to know that, in theory, someone from your streets can beat the odds. And that uneven hope is exactly what Snow wants. Fragmented responses. No unified front, every district negotiating with the same cruel rules in its own isolated way. So you start to wonder, who are the forgotten victors from 5, 6, 9, 10, quietly shipped back to half-built victors' villages, then crushed under the same post-games contracts that destroy Haymitch and Finnick? And when the Quarter Quell rips them back into the spotlight, what other buried rules are waiting to surface with them? Career districts, when the rules actually work. And that's where the contrast hits you. While those forgotten victors disappear into half-finished houses, there are districts where the whole system seems designed to do the opposite. Polish you, promote you, and then throw you into the arena with a smile. This is where we talk about the career districts. 1, 2, and 4. Wealthier, closer to the capital, and raised on the idea that the Hunger Games aren't a punishment for rebellion, but a career path. At face value, that sounds absurd. Who looks at a death match and thinks, job opportunity? But in these districts, the relationship between the games and status has been rewritten so thoroughly that parents brag about their kids' kill counts the way others brag about test scores. So why does it work there? Because the rules quietly bend around them. You're technically not allowed to train for the games before your name is drawn. In District 12, that rule is real. In District 2, it's a punchline. They have so-called sports academies, where kids spend their childhoods throwing spears, climbing ropes, and sparring with real blades. The capital looks the other way, because those academies produce tributes who know how to put on a show. Their mentors actually mentor. They don't show up drunk, traumatized, or ignored by their own district. They sit in the training center, walk their tributes through weapon stations, explain how to gain the training scores, and rehearse interview answers that will charm sponsors. Here's the real question. When the rulebook says everyone gets the same 3 days of training, but some kids have been in an arena-shaped gym since age 8, is that really the same game anymore? The rules reward that head start very efficiently. Higher training scores mean more screen time. More screen time means more sponsor interest. And sponsorship is literally a rule-based lifeline. Gifts only move through official capital channels at inflated prices, delivered when the game makers decide it's dramatic enough. A career with a score of 11 gets showered with burn salve and bread. A terrified kid from 10 with a 5, they die of infection off camera because nobody in the stands felt a spark of hope watching them. There is a lot to uncover here psychologically. In the poorer districts, the games are a yearly terror. Kids count tesserae entries and pray. In the career districts, children grow up watching victors come home to full victors' villages. Parades, constant attention. The rule that exempts victors from future reapings doesn't read as survivor's curse there. It reads as a promise. Train hard, volunteer at 18, win, and you never work the quarries or the docks again. And that part matters because it gives the capital perfect footage. You don't just see kids begging not to be chosen. You see kids in District 1 and 2 stepping forward, smiling, treating the reaping stage as a talent show. The games become a test of excellence, not a state-sanctioned execution. That's the narrative Snow needs. Not 12 districts in open despair, but a few honored places that appear to embrace the system. Pattern interrupt. Even those honored tributes are still disposable. The third Quarter Quell proves it. When the capital turns the rulebook on its own victors and reaps from the existing pool, The career districts finally get the same message as everyone else. Your training academies, your high scores, your extra victors' village houses mean nothing when the capital gets bored. We're going to cover how that betrayal doesn't just shatter individuals, it cracks the entire illusion that the games can ever be a safe path to anything. Why allow volunteers at all? The meta question. So once that illusion collapses, you hit this awkward, uncomfortable question the story never states outright. If the capital wants total control, why allow any choice at all? Here's the real question. Why even have a volunteering rule on the books? Why let anyone step forward, trade places, or game the system if what you supposedly want is a clean, terrifying, random punishment for the districts? At face value, a pure lottery sounds scarier. Your name goes in because of tesserae. The odds stack against you every hungry year. And when it's drawn, that's it. No volunteers, no careers, no siblings leaping in front of you. Just a legal execution dressed up as a TV event. You could push that even further. Imagine a version of the games with no victors' mansions, no sponsors, no parades, no makeover rule forcing tributes into sequins and fire, no training center scores to chase, no silver parachutes to hope for. Just 2 names, an arena, and a guaranteed death sentence. That sounds brutally efficient, right? But that part matters because a system built on nothing but terror is actually weaker. When all you give people is fear, you back them into a corner. Cornered districts don't stay obedient forever. They get desperate. They riot. They refuse the reaping. They start asking why the capital's children never go into the bowl. Snow understands something more subtle. The most stable cage isn't the one with the strongest bars. It's the one where the prisoner believes there's a door they might earn. Volunteers and victors are that door. They're the proof of concept that the games can work for you if you play along. Think about the careers. Districts 1, 2, and 4 run training programs even though it's technically illegal. Kids volunteer because they've seen the relationship between performance scores, sponsors, and those giant houses on the hill. They know if you score high in the training center, rich capital audiences will send you water when the game makers set the trees on fire or blow the arena into sections. The rule that allows intervention, floods, mutts, sudden firestorms, turns into a promise: be entertaining, and the capital might literally change the weather for you. There is a lot to uncover here. Volunteers aren't just brave, they're invested. Victors aren't just survivors, they're advertisements. Every mansion in Victor's village, every full pantry in a starving district is a live-action poster that says, "See, the system can pay off. Don't fight it, beat it." So, this is where we talk about the real weapon. It isn't fear by itself. It's fear carefully laced with just enough hope to keep you watching, training, volunteering, and wondering if somehow the next rule twist could finally break your way. But what happens when that hope stops feeling optional and starts feeling rigged on purpose? Hope, carefully controlled, the rule beneath all rules. It starts with a sentence that sounds almost reasonable. Snow tells Seneca Crane, "Hope. It is the only thing stronger than fear. A little hope is effective. A lot of hope is dangerous." At face value, that sounds like generic villain philosophy. But here's the real question. What happens when you realize that line isn't just advice for one head game maker, it's the operating system for the entire rulebook? Suddenly, all those rules we've been talking about snap into focus. The one victor rule, that's a little hope in its purest form. Statistically, your district's kids are doomed. But technically, someone could win. Someone did win. Their face is on the train, their house is on the hill. That part matters because it keeps parents telling themselves, if my child trains, if my child gets sponsors, if the arena favors them this year, the fear of the games never goes away, but it gets braided with a tiny poisonous promise. Look at tesserae. The reaping is already terrifying, but the capital adds an option. You can buy grain and oil for the price of extra entries. They've turned starvation into a gambling mechanic. Why not just let people starve and rule by terror alone? Because terror alone breaks people. Terror plus a choice, even a rigged one, keeps you participating. There is a lot to uncover here. You're not just scared of your name being drawn, you're actively collaborating with the system that makes it more likely. Executions could do the job faster. Public whippings, firing squads, mass graves, and the capital absolutely uses those. But executions only give you fear. The games give you fear and aspiration. You watch children die horribly, but you also watch one become rich, styled, adored. Which is more sustainable for a regime built on television? The spectacle where everyone loses, or the spectacle where one person wins so the rest keep tuning in, volunteering, training their kids? This is where we talk about Victor's Village again as pure architectural hope. A row of mansions no one can enter, fully powered in districts that black out, placed just far enough away that children can see them every day on the way to the mines or the fields. It's a physical argument. Winning is real. See the proof. Never mind that in most districts there are 1 or 2 occupied houses and 10 standing empty, waiting for victors who will almost never exist. Sponsorships run on the same equation. The rules say the right performance score, the right charm in training, can literally buy you bread in the arena. The game makers can manipulate prices and timing, but they never close the door completely. Why? Because as long as you believe you could earn that parachute, you'll play along with the interviews, the costumes, the trauma on camera. And here's the cruelest part. The most important rule isn't printed anywhere. It's the unwritten law that hope will always be dangled, never delivered at scale. No rule ever offers hope of ending the games, only of surviving them individually. You can escape the reaping, maybe. You can escape one arena, maybe. But you can never escape the system. So what happens when a tribute stops seeing hope as a prize and starts seeing it as bait? That's when Snow's careful balance starts to crack, and the rules themselves become the capital's biggest vulnerability. The arena isn't nature, the rule that lets game makers play God. Once you realize hope is bait, you start looking at every rule and asking a different question: who's holding the fishing line? This is where we talk about the arena itself, because there's a brutal rule most people treat as background noise. The arena is not nature. Buried in the game maker's authority is an explicit mandate. If the games get dull, they can intervene. Not just a little nudge. Full control. Terrain, weather, day-night cycles, mutations, even the rules about victors can be adjusted midstream. At face value, that sounds like production flexibility. But here's the real question. How do you strategize in a world where the laws of physics are a content setting? Think about Katniss in the 74th Games. She's doing something smart, avoiding the careers, using the woods, relying on the one advantage District 12 kids actually have: hunting skills. In a normal environment, that's a valid plan. So what's the capital's response when the cameras get bored? A wall of fire that literally shepherds her toward the careers camp. Not a random forest fire. A perfectly timed ring with fireballs targeted enough to hit her, but not damage the cameras. That part matters because it tells you the weather is not an obstacle course. It's a remote-controlled cattle prod. Then there's the tracker-jacker nest. On paper, you could call that Katniss using the environment to her advantage. But the only reason that genetically engineered hive is hanging conveniently above her and the careers is because the arena has been planted, curated, and monitored. When Rue points it out, you're not watching two kids outsmart nature, you're watching two kids trying to reverse engineer a set the game makers designed to kill them on cue. And when the mutts appear at the finale, the illusion pretty much collapses. These things aren't wild animals. They look eerily like the dead tributes, arrive exactly when the standoff at the cornucopia risks becoming a stalemate, and are calibrated to push Katniss and Peter into one last spectacular confrontation. We're going to cover mutts more later, but for now notice the pattern. Anytime the games threaten to slow down or resolve off camera, the environment spontaneously fixes it. Even the famous two victor rule is part of this. The announcement letting two tributes from the same district win, then the later reversal, is treated as a dramatic twist. But it only works because the rulebook is understood to be fluid. The Capitol promises District 12 hope, then yanks it away the second it stops serving the narrative. So every tribute isn't just fighting 23 other kids, they're fighting a production team with God mode access. You're encouraged to plan, to train, to form alliances to study past arenas for patterns. And then a single button in the control room can invalidate months of preparation because the ratings dipped. Which raises a final ugly question. When a tribute dies in a flood, a freeze, a sudden pack of mutts, did they really die by chance? Or by a line item on a game maker schedule? Hold on to that thought, because the next rule proves even your sponsors are playing on their board, not yours. The two victor twist, a rule change designed to hurt more. So if the game makers can script deaths with a weather report, what happens when they start scripting hope? The most brutal rule in the entire system might be the one they pretend is a gift. You remember the announcement in the 74th games. Claudius Templesmith's voice booms through the trees. The rules have been changed. Two tributes from the same district can both win. One sentence, and suddenly the entire arena flips. At face value, it sounds merciful. Twice the chances. Right? But here's the real question. Why would a capital built on fear suddenly offer a buy one get one free victor deal? Watch what it does to Katniss instantly. Before the announcement, her strategy is pure survival. Avoid the careers, avoid the cameras, avoid getting attached. The games are a math problem with one correct answer. Then she hears Peter's name. The rule doesn't just change the odds, it changes her behavior. She starts hunting for him, risking exposure, playing into the star-crossed lovers angle Haymitch has been nudging. That part matters because it proves Snow's favorite doctrine in real time. You don't need more force if you can redirect people with hope. This is where we talk about ratings. The Capitol isn't suddenly growing a conscience, it's losing interest. The careers are predictable, Rue is dead, Katniss is hiding in the trees. So why the change? Because a love story sells better than a stalemate. The two victor twist is a narrative device, not a moral awakening. It turns the games into a romance the audience can ship. It justifies more sponsor gifts, and it frames the Capitol as generous without costing them anything yet. There is a lot to uncover here. The moment Katniss and Peter commit to that promise, the rule becomes a weapon. They save each other, they play up the relationship, they bleed for this new future where both can go home. And then, when there are only two tributes left, Templesmith comes back on. The earlier revision has been revoked. Back to one victor. No explanation, no apology, just a live, public ultimatum. Pattern interrupt. Up until now, every rule has pushed tributes toward death. This one forces them to choose who dies. You're not just watching kids kill to survive. You're watching them decide whether to murder the person they've just been rewarded for loving. That's a different kind of cruelty, and the Capitol knows it. Here's the real question again. What does this do to the districts watching? It teaches them the lessons Snow once burned into their nervous systems. The Capitol can give you everything you dream of: safety, reunion, a shared victory, and then rip it away a second before you touch it. Hope becomes a trap that keeps you performing, begging, obeying, because maybe this time they'll keep their word. And then Katniss breaks the script. The Nightlock berries aren't just a romantic gesture, they are a legal crisis. By threatening a double suicide, she exposes how fragile those rules really are. If the Capitol lets them both die, the games end without a victor, the entire season's story collapses, and the promise of future games loses its shine. If they cave, they admit the rules were never sacred, just flexible tools for control. They cave. 2 victors from District 12 walk out of the arena, and the Capitol's perfect relationship with its own rulebook cracks. The audience sees that a teenage girl forced a policy change with a handful of poisonous fruit, and once you've seen the rules bend, you start to wonder, what else could break? We're going to cover what happens when the Capitol tries to fix that mistake next, because the price of that one moment of defiance is written into the next set of rules Snow unveils. Dissponsorship. When survival is a pay-to-win system, Snow's fix doesn't just show up in the quietest, most vicious rules of the games. Sponsorship. You remember the silver parachutes drifting down, right? Here's the real question. Who actually controls when, how, and to whom those parachutes fall? At face value, sponsorship seems merciful. If the audience loves you enough, they can send medicine, food, or tools. Hope in a care package. But the rule underneath is brutal. Only sponsors can send gifts, and only through official Capitol channels, at prices the game makers set. There is no backdoor, no district smuggling, no parent slipping you a bandage. Survival is literally paywalled, and the Capitol takes its cut. This is where we talk about marketability. Before you ever touch the arena, you're turned into a product. Training scores, interview performances, the way your stylist frames your story, all of that is designed to make you investable. A 12 with a bow? That's a high-risk, high-reward stock. A trembling kid from District 10 with a middling score? Not exactly a hot commodity. That part matters because the games are supposed to be about skill and luck. But the sponsorship rule adds a third factor: profitability. So why does Caesar Flickerman joke with you on stage? Why does Cinna fight for that fiery entrance? Because the relationship between spectacle and survival is literal. If you can't get the crowd to care, you don't just have fewer fans, you have fewer antibiotics, fewer burn creams, fewer loaves of bread when you're starving in a tree. And even when someone does care, the Capitol still holds the stopwatch. Sponsors might be ready to pay immediately, but delivery timing is controlled by the production team. They can delay a life-saving ointment until it makes a better story, or drop water at the exact moment a tribute is about to collapse. You think you earned that gift by being clever? Or did a game maker decide your near-death would spike ratings first? There is a lot to uncover here about class. Kids from the poorer districts already took tesserae, already had their odds stacked. Now they arrive in the capital with bad teeth, no training, and zero fashion advantage. Are the wealthy capital viewers going to pour money into the scared, underfed tribute, or the polished career who's been coached since birth? The answer is the reason sponsorship might be the cruelest rule of all, because it means some tributes are effectively dead before they step off the train. Not because they can't fight, but because the rules make them unprofitable. So when you see a kid die of infection from a minor cut, you have to ask, was that a failure of survival skills or a budget decision in a control room? We're going to cover what happens when that same logic follows the victor's home next, because the pay-to-win system doesn't stop when the arena disappears. It just gets rebranded as a reward. The makeover mandate: you don't own your own body. The pay-to-win system doesn't stop in the arena. It just changes costumes. Because before a tribute ever swings a weapon, there's another rule waiting for them. You are legally forbidden to refuse the makeover, the parade, or the interview. You can fight the careers. You cannot fight the curling iron. And here's the real question: why does the Capitol care so much about how a kid about to die looks on camera? At face value, the makeover week looks generous. Spas, buffets, silk robes, a whole glam squad whose only job is to help you. But this is where we talk about ownership. The stylists don't just pick an outfit. They strip you naked, wax your body, dye your hair, redesign your nails, and decide which parts of you are allowed to exist. You're not a person, you're raw material for a brand. The girl on fire, the innocent lamb, the smoldering career. There is a lot to uncover here, because the law that makes capital spectacle mandatory does three things at once. First, it entertains the audience. Those parades and Caesar Flickerman interviews are the trailer before the horror movie. Second, it erases who you were in your district. Your calloused hands, your miner's posture, your factory burns, gone under polish and powder. Third, that part matters because once you're a character, you're easier to consume. Kids don't die, the baker's boy and the fox-faced girl exit the games. Think about the relationship between Cinna and Katniss. He's kind, he respects her, he tries to give her agency. But even he is operating inside a rule set where saying no is not an option. If Katniss refused to wear the flaming dress, that's not a quirky fashion disagreement. That's a punishable act of defiance. The Capitol can't afford a tribute who reminds people they didn't volunteer to be here. And this isn't just fantasy cruelty. Authoritarian regimes in our world have always understood the power of forced appearance. Uniforms that erase class differences while enforcing obedience. Mandated hairstyles, choreographed parades where you must smile, wave, and pretend the system works. The message is the same. We own your body, and we will decide how it is displayed. So why does this rule hurt in a different way than the combat rules? Because the parade and interview say, we won't just kill you, we will turn you into entertainment first, we will make you flirt with Caesar, twirl for the cameras, answer soft questions about your hopes and dreams while your family watches from the district square. So which is more dehumanizing? Being forced to fight for your life, or being forced to smile and spin for the Capitol before the killing starts? Hold that question, because next we're going to cover what happens when that same performance doesn't end with the closing cannon. It follows the victor home, permanently. The fine print of victory, contracts you can't refuse. Because here's the twist. When you win and go home to that shiny house on the hill, you don't just get a key, you get a contract. At face value, it's presented as logistics. The capital needs you for interviews, appearances, mentoring. Of course, the new victor will come back next year to advise the fresh tributes from their district, right? That sounds respectful, almost honorable. But here's the real question. When did surviving a state-sponsored death match turn into a full-time job you can't quit? This is where we talk about the fine print of victory. Every victor is bound, on paper or by threat, to a lifelong schedule. Annual games, mandatory mentoring, victory tour, capital parties, propaganda shoots. You're the face of hope, whether you believe in it or not. There is a lot to uncover here, because those rules don't just manage your calendar, they manage your behavior. You miss an event? You refuse an interview? That part matters because the punishment doesn't land on you first. It lands on your mother, your siblings, your district. We see the outline of this with Katniss, but Haymitch is the full case study. He wins the second quarter quell by outsmarting the arena's force field. And what's the Capitol's response? They quietly assassinate everyone he loves back home. No public trial, no announcement, just a message. The relationship between Victor and Capital is obedience or extinction. From that moment on, his contract isn't just ink, it's blood. Look at his life after. Decades of forced mentoring. Every year, 2 more children from District 12 dragged to the games, and he has to ride that train, watch them die, and then come back to the same empty house. Over and over. He's required to attend the training center, strategize, smile through Caesar Flickerman's questions, then sit in the mentor's lounge while the arena tears his tributes apart. The constant travel, the drinking, the way his house in Victor's village rots around him, that's not laziness. That's a man serving a life sentence. And here's the cruel efficiency. This rule keeps the system running. Victors become advertisements and enforcers at the same time. You as a kid watching from the square see someone from your district who made it, dressed well, speaking with the capital, proof that the promise of the games is real. But inside the training center, that same Victor is teaching you how to play by capital rules, which alliances to make, how to perform in the parade. They're passing on the script that once trapped them. So when does the arena actually end? The answer is, it doesn't. The cameras change, the scenery changes, but the performance never stops. Winning doesn't cancel the games. It just upgrades your role from tribute to recurring cast member. And when we get to the quarter quell twist, we'll see how one rule shatters even that illusion of safety, and why the districts finally stop believing the capital's promise at all. Victor's village up close, the mansion as a surveillance device, the cameras change, the role changes, but where do they actually put you to keep the performance going? They put you on a hill, in a mansion, in a place that looks safe from a distance and feels wrong the second you step inside. Victor's village is never in the middle of anything. It's a cluster of oversized houses set apart from the main district, usually on higher ground with a clear line of sight, in and out. In District 12, you walk past the seam, past the merchant streets, and then there's this eerie suburb of 12 mansions, with only a handful ever occupied. Wide streets, no crowds. At face value, it's peaceful. In practice, it's a soundstage that's very easy to monitor. And that part matters because isolation is a control mechanism. When you win, you don't go back to your old street or your old room. You're extracted from your life. Your neighbors, the ones who remember you before the games, stay down in the district. You're moved up the hill with other victors who are traumatized, compromised, or both. So who do you complain to? Who do you organize with? Here's the real question. How do you start a rebellion when the only people near you are either watching you or being watched with you? There is a lot to uncover here. In terms of surveillance, you've got peacekeeper patrols whose route conveniently loops around this almost empty neighborhood. You've got straight, open streets with no alleys to hide in, perfect for spot checks and surprise visits. The capital can send a hovercraft, a car, or a camera crew at any time, and there's no crowd to get lost in. When Caesar Flickerman wants a post-victory interview or Snow wants a quiet little warning, they know exactly which front door to knock on. Inside, the houses themselves are part of the system. This is where we talk about Katniss's mansion. Hot water on demand, endless food, electric lights, a closet full of capital fashions. Every convenience is wired through capital tech. The televisions that can turn on without you touching them. The phones with direct lines out of the district, but only to approved places. Even the kitchen is a reminder that your family eats better now because you keep playing your part. Your comfort is conditional. It's a contract you never signed. Katniss feels this constantly. The fancy furniture doubles as a museum of her own story, gifts from sponsors, portraits the training equipment sent for her talent, the prep team barging in to remake her as the Mockingjay. Her house tells her every day that the reason her mother and Prim are safe, the reason Gale's family has food, is because she keeps the capital's narrative alive. Until she doesn't, and then that same village becomes the only part of District 12 they bother to spare. A burned district with one pristine cage left standing. So is Victor's village a reward, or is it a display case? The relationship between those two ideas is the real cruelty. The mansions have to be visible so every starving child can see the promise of escape, but they're also designed to keep victors alone, separated, and under glass. We're going to cover how that visibility feeds into Snow's larger strategy next, and why the hilltop dream home is really just the first wall of the prison. District-level rewards. How one house divides an entire town. Visibility is step 1. Step 2 is reward, because what good is a glass prison on a hill if the rest of the district doesn't feel the pull of it every single time the games end? So this is where we talk about the victory celebrations. The trains come home, the cameras roll, and suddenly a place that's been counting tesserae just to avoid starving is drowning in feasts. Extra grain, extra oil, meat on tables that haven't seen meat in months. For a few days, the ration lines move faster. The peacekeepers forget to crack down, and the whole district is told very clearly, this is what winning tastes like. At face value, it looks generous. Your child survives the arena, and for once, nobody's scraping the bottom of the soup pot. But here's the real question. Why does the capital pour so much food into a place it spent the entire year starving on purpose? The reason is simple and brutal. They're teaching everyone that survival doesn't come from ending the games. It comes from playing them well enough to produce a victor. You see it in District 12 when Katniss and Peter return. There's music, booze, tables sagging under food. Children who've had their names multiplied in the reaping because of tesserae suddenly get full plates, and their brains make a dangerous connection. Maybe the arena is horrible, but the after party means my siblings eat. And then there's the mansion. The victor's house isn't just nice. It's the nicest thing in the district by a mile. Full power when the rest of town's lights flicker or die. Hot water, stocked pantries, plush furniture in a place where most people sleep 3 to a bed. That part matters because it turns one address into permanent propaganda. Every time you walk past Victor's village, you're reminded of the promise, one day that could be you. But the social impact is where the knife really twists. Some people idolize the victor. Kids stare at their windows, rehearse interview answers in the mirror, dream of sponsors instead of dreaming of rebellion. Others look at that same house and see the graveyard behind it. Their child went into the arena too. Their child didn't come back. So why does the survivor live in a palace while their kitchen is still empty? That resentment doesn't go upward towards snow. It goes sideways into the community. Neighbors stop trusting each other. Families of the dead might avoid the victor in the square or whisper that they didn't deserve to win. The relationship between grief and envy becomes another tool of control. And this is exactly what the capital wants. Keep every district hoping for a winner instead of hoping for an end to the games. Keep them debating whether this year's tribute has a chance instead of whether the system itself should exist. So here's the real question. Can any district truly mourn the dead while also celebrating the wealth their deaths brought in? Or does every feast guarantee the next reaping? And if that's true, what happens the first time a district refuses to eat? Books versus movies. Which version hides more cruelty? So when a district refuses to eat, what exactly are they refusing? Because if you've only seen the movies, it can feel like they're just turning their backs on a brutal sport. But here's the real question. In the books, what invisible rulebook are they actually rejecting that the films barely show you? At face value, the adaptations give you the big stuff. The cornucopia, the fireballs, the mutts. Spectacle. You feel the danger. But there is a lot to uncover here once you go back to the novels, because they won't stop quietly explaining the math and the paperwork behind every horror. Tesserae isn't just extra grain, it's an equation. Every year you take food, you add another entry to the reaping, and those entries stack for every remaining year you're eligible. A 12-year-old who's been feeding their family is already buried under odds before the games even begin. Then you get sponsorships. On screen, it's a silver parachute and a hopeful music cue. In the books, it's basically a price sheet. Each gift has a cost. Haymitch has to gamble his limited sponsor money, and the game makers can delay or time deliveries for maximum drama. Survival is literally paywalled. That part matters because it turns "may the odds be ever in your favor" into "may your district be rich enough and entertaining enough to afford you oxygen." The novels spell out that when you win, you don't just get a crown, you sign, you become property. Victors are bound to mentor, to appear in the capital, to perform a talent on command. Haymitch's permanent drunkenness suddenly reads less quirky and more contractual burnout when you remember he is legally forced to train kids he knows will die every single year. And then there's the thing the films almost look away from, the sexual exploitation. In the books, Finnick's lovers are not a flirty rumor, they're a weapon. Snow sells victors' bodies to wealthy capital citizens and threatens their families if they refuse. The movies hint at trauma but dodge the explicit mechanics, which is a strange mercy that also hides one of the system's most sadistic rules. Notice what gets smoothed out on screen: Peter's prosthetic leg, the long months of mentoring obligations, the dead-eyed routine of victors shuttled back and forth between the village and the capital. Without all that fine print, the games can register as a contained nightmare you might somehow escape, instead of a legalistic prison you never leave. So which version feels more disturbing to you? The one that shows you the blood, or the one that itemizes the bill? And if most audiences remember the spectacle but forget the contracts, what does that say about how the capital would prefer you to watch the games? Because the next rule we need to look at doesn't happen in the arena at all. It happens in the train car on the way home, designing every district's victor's village. That train doesn't just take you home, it delivers you to a new neighborhood that's already been built for you. Winning the games earns you a mansion in Victor's village. But here's the real question. Why does the capital care enough to build a luxury micro-suburb in every single district? For maybe 3 or 4 people at most. District 12 gives us the template. You walk up that hill and it's quiet. Too quiet, 12 identical houses, full electricity, hot water, polished wood, and for most of Katniss's life, basically a ghost town with one drunk victor rotting in the corner. At face value, it's a reward. In practice, it's an exhibit. The scene kids can literally see the promise of comfort. But there's no life, no laughter, just the echo of the games following Haymitch from room to room. So what happens when you copy-paste that rule into District 1 or 2? Suddenly the same layout feels crowded. You'd have multiple generations of victors, career mentors, meeting on manicured lawns, kids growing up with a victor on every other porch. Capital visitors would cycle through constantly, turning the village into a live studio set. This is where we talk about celebrity. In the career districts, the village isn't eerie, it's aspirational. You don't just want to survive, you want to move into that address, join that social circle, become part of that relationship between the capital and its favorite killers. Now jump to the industrial districts. District 3, 5, 6. There is a lot to uncover here if you imagine Victor's village as a kind of executive suburb. You'd expect upgraded tech in 3, smart locks, experimental gadgets, maybe direct communication lines the rest of the district will never touch. In 5, energy-efficient everything, always on power while the rest of the district deals with rationing. In 6, medical perks, private clinics, experimental treatments, the best painkillers for the victor who can't sleep. That part matters because the capital isn't just handing out houses, it's handing out proof that obedience and spectacle can literally rewire the world around you. Then you hit the agricultural districts, 9, 10, 11, and the contrast gets crueler. Imagine mansions dropped in the middle of fields where everyone else breaks their back from dawn to dark. Big porches overlooking grain, cattle, or orchards, with fences that say, "This is where the games end, and your life never will." In 11 especially, where punishment is brutal and public, that mansion would stand out as both miracle and threat. You see the victor's house when you pick, when you're whipped, when you bury your dead. So why design it this way? Because one rule, victors get a house, gets tailored to each district to maximize envy, to deepen class division, and to keep hope on a leash. Your children grow up staring at that roofline and asking, "What if it were me?" And the capital quietly asks back, "What would you be willing to do?" The next rule is what you owe for the key. The rules that break victors, Haymitch, Finnick, and beyond. That key doesn't open a door. It locks you in, because once you're a victor, the next rule is brutal in its simplicity. You belong to the capital, your house, your food, your supposed safety. All of that is conditional. And here's the real question. What happens when a victor remembers they once had power in the arena and starts to think they might have power outside it too? This is where we talk about Haymitch. At face value, he's the drunk uncle of District 12, stumbling through the games on autopilot. But the reason he drinks is a rule violation. In the 50th Hunger Games, he doesn't just win, he embarrasses the game makers by using the force field edge against them. The capital cannot allow that relationship at the audience to stand. So Snow rewrites the terms of his victory. They kill his mother, his younger brother, his girlfriend. Everyone he loves, systematically erased as punishment for being clever. Then they force him into decades of mentoring, making him watch child after child from his district go to the slaughter. So every year the train comes. Every year he's contractually required to polish 2 more lambs for the butcher. That part matters because it turns mentor into a weapon. You don't just survive, you become an accessory to other people's deaths, on camera, forever. Finnick shows you the next rule, the one no one prints on a contract. If you're beautiful enough, charismatic enough, the capital decides your body is still in play. Officially, he's a beloved victor, paraded on Caesar's stage, selling the fantasy that the games can launch you into celebrity. Offstage, he's being sold to capital elites as a prize. The price of saying no, threats against Annie, against Mags, against anyone he's ever shown affection for. We're going to cover more of Finnick later, but for now, notice the pattern. The promise of freedom becomes permanent blackmail. Johanna gets a different flavor of the same rule. She refuses to play nice, so they strip her in the elevator, they strip her of her family, and eventually, in capital prison, they strip her mind. Torture, water, electricity, and then reconditioning. Annie is locked in an institution, her trauma weaponized as both a warning and a leash on Finnick. Beatty, Enobaria Chaff. Each victor is monitored, pressured, pushed into roles that maintain the game's mythology. There is a lot to uncover here, but the core is this. These aren't rare exceptions. They're logical extensions of the victor contract. If you become too popular, you're exploited. If you become too defiant, you're broken. Either way, you keep selling the capital story that the games are inescapable. So here's the last awful question. When you look at Haymitch in his empty house, at Finnick on a leash of secrets, at Johanna shaking in a shower because the capital rewired her brain, was dying in the arena actually the kinder outcome? Or is the cruelest rule of all still coming? The quarter quell, when the rules turn on the victors themselves. So when the capital asks, want to see something special, during a quarter quell, you already know that word doesn't mean what it's supposed to mean. On paper, the quells sound ceremonial. Every 25 years, the games get a commemorative twist, supposedly written into sealed envelopes at the founding of Panem. At face value, that makes them feel inevitable, almost sacred. This isn't Snow improvising, it's history unfolding. But here's the real question. Do you honestly believe an autocrat who poisons his rivals is suddenly a stickler for original documentation? There is a lot to uncover here. The first quarter quell forces districts to vote on which of their own children to send. The second doubles the tributes, turning the arena into a mass grave. Both are framed as reflections on the dark days, a way to remind you why rebellion was a mistake. Yet the real pattern is simpler. Every quell rewrites the rules just enough to restate the same threat. You are trapped. The games can always get worse. Then you hit the 75th. This is where we talk about the rule that breaks the whole system. Tributes will be reaped from the existing pool of victors. Not new names, old wounds. You're pulled out of your victor's village kitchen and dropped back at the cornucopia. That part matters because it takes the one promise the capital has dangled for decades, win and you're done, and burns it on live television. Think about the relationship between that promise and the village. The mansion, the food, the hot water, the way children in your district stare up at your street and think, If I survive, I get that forever. The third quarter quell turns that into a lie with a single announcement. Katniss isn't protected by her crown. Her crown is the reason she's targeted. The rule doesn't just send victors back. It tells every watching child that even if you beat impossible odds, the Capitol reserves the right to change the contract after you sign it. Snow claims the envelopes were written long ago, but the timing is too perfect. A girl becomes a symbol of hope by forcing the game makers to allow 2 victors. Suddenly, oh look, a pre-written clause that lets him drag only victors back into the arena. Coincidence? Or a dictator discovering that founding documents make great props? Authoritarians in our world do the same thing: extend term limits, rewrite constitutions, strip legal protections, always with a calm explanation about stability or tradition. So why does this twist backfire? Because when the Capitol proves the rules are fake, the fear changes flavor. You stop fearing the game's ending. You start wondering what happens when the people who have nothing left to lose realize the paper was the only thing holding them in place. And the next rule we're going to cover pushes that even further. Because what if the Capitol doesn't just change who fights, but the very nature of the arena itself? If you lived in Panem, which rule would kill you first? So if the Capitol can rewrite the arena mid-fight, here's the real question. What happens when the rules start before you ever see a mutt? What happens when the first arena is your own kitchen table? You're in District 12. Your mother's thinning the stew again. The bread's gone. The tesserae form is sitting there. Do you sign your name and trade one more year of grain and oil for another slip in the reaping bowl? Or do you refuse? Keep your odds lower and watch your family starve a little faster. That's not a dramatic hypothetical. That's the law. At face value, tesserae is a choice. Food now, risk later. But that part matters because the odds don't reset. Every extra entry you take at 12 is still there when you're 17. So by the time reaping day comes, the poorest kid in your district isn't just unlucky. They're mathematically hunted. You chose survival, and the game's quietly turned it into consent. Now jump to District 2. You're a career trainee. You've been raised on weapons you're technically not allowed to touch until the training center, coached on how to turn your private session into a performance score that screams sponsor potential. You volunteer, and everyone calls it honor. But here's the twist. You never really got to ask whether you wanted out. Your whole district is built around the games as a career path, with Victor's Village as the visible promise on the hill. So which rule kills you first there? The arena manipulation that rewards aggression? The sponsorship bias that funnels gifts to the photogenic killers from 1 and 2, while a quiet kid from 11 bleeds out off camera? Or the unspoken rule that if you don't play along with the career system, you become an outsider in your own home? This is where we talk about the middle zones. Say you're in District 5, not starving, not privileged. You probably don't need tesserae every year, but you're also not getting a lifetime of combat training. Your danger comes from the in-between rules, training scores that decide whether sponsors even bother to learn your name, and game makers who can flood your sector of the arena because your storyline isn't trending. So ask yourself, which rule do you think is the most sadistic? The one that lets the Capitol set the weather on fire? The one that turns sponsorship into a popularity contest where personality is worth more than skill? Or the one that says, even if you beat all of this and become a victor, you never actually leave the games? Because we're going to cover that too. The contract you don't see, mandatory mentoring, Capitol parties, the quiet threat that if you stop playing, your family pays. Every choice in Panem is pre-rigged so that survival and complicity have a very close relationship. And that's the horror, not just that you might die, but that the safest thing you can do is help the games work. So what happens when the capital realizes it can weaponize that instinct inside the arena itself? The illusion of freedom, how the rules pretend to give you options. They don't just weaponize your survival instinct with threats. They dress it up as freedom. On paper, the Hunger Games are full of choices. You can volunteer, you can pick your own training stations, you can form alliances, court sponsors, even dream about that 1 in 24 chance to win and retire in a mansion in Victor's village. At face value, it sounds almost negotiable. You don't just die, you get options. But here's the real question. How many of those options are real, and how many are scripted moves in a game you were never meant to control? Start with volunteering. Technically, anyone can shout their name at the reaping. In practice, where does it actually work? In the career districts, where kids are groomed for the arena, fed well, and told from birth that winning is their job. In a place like District 12, volunteering is so rare that when Katniss does it, everyone freezes. The freedom to volunteer only functions if your district culture has already been engineered to support it. Training looks free too. You wander the training center, choose stations, test weapons. There is a lot to uncover here, but the key is the rules. No serious fighting with other tributes, no banned weapons, no refusing the private session. The careers exploit this because their real training happened years earlier, off the books. For everyone else, it's a control tutorial before the real exam the game makers are writing in secret. Alliances feel personal. You decide who to trust, who to betray. This is where we talk about the arena itself as the third player in every pact. The rulebook literally allows game makers to change terrain, weather, and unleash mutts whenever the games get dull. They can separate you with a wall of fire, drain your water sources, or drop a feast at the cornucopia that no starving tribute can ignore. Your alliance doesn't end when you choose. It ends when the capital gets better ratings from tearing it apart. Sponsors, supposedly you win them with personality and strategy, but every gift is filtered through capital channels, priced and timed for maximum drama. If you're from a poor district, if your story doesn't sell, your freedom to impress sponsors is capped by the audience's boredom threshold and the game maker's edit. And even the promise of Victor's village is conditional. Win, and you're free from the reaping, but bound to mentoring, interviews, capital parties. That part matters because it turns retirement into another contract. You're not out of the games, you've just changed roles. Snow and the game makers even anticipate rebellion. When Katniss and Peter force the two-victor twist with the berries, the rules bend overnight, then snap back for the quarter quell. The message is brutal. Even your defiance can be patched into the script, which might be the deepest cruelty of all. Not just limiting freedom, but staging a performance of freedom that keeps you emotionally invested in choices that were never yours. So what does it mean that Katniss's most dangerous move isn't choosing Peter or Gale, or spears or snares, but refusing to choose at all? What happens when the only honest answer to a rigged question is mutual death? And what if the capital suddenly can't afford to call that bluff? From rulebook to revolution, what the cruelest rules reveal. That's the moment the mask slips. Right the second Katniss and Peter threaten mutual death, you realize the games were never about swords and snares. They were about whether the capital could force you to play by rules that were rigged from the first tesserae to the last victor contract. So let's zoom out. We started with tesserae and the reaping, where hunger literally buys you more chances to die. Every extra grain and oil ration means your name doesn't just go in one more time that year, it stays. It multiplies across every remaining year you're eligible. That's not random selection. That's a debt trap written into a children's lottery. Then we moved into the training center, where the illusion of fairness gets a makeover. At face value, every tribute gets the same weapons racks, the same private session, the same chance at a score. But here's the real question. Why does a single number from board game makers suddenly decide who lives long enough to reach the cornucopia? Because sponsors watch the scores, the capital sets the prices, and a 12 can buy you water while an 8 dies of thirst 2 arenas away. On paper, the game makers can only intervene to keep things moving. In practice, that means they control the weather, the mutts, the fire, the feast, even the timing of your injuries. You think you're watching a survival contest. You're actually watching a stage director punishing anyone who refuses to hit their mark. This is where we talk about the economics of hope. Sponsorship gifts feel generous, but they're routed through official channels, delayed or accelerated for drama, and priced so high that only flashy compliant tributes are worth investing in. That part matters because it turns personality into currency and obedience into oxygen. If you're boring, if your district isn't politically useful, you suffocate quietly in the dark. And even if you beat all of that, you sign the Victor contract. You move to Victor's Village, the capital's favorite contradiction, a mansion, full power, hot water, food on demand, but also direct phone lines to Snow, mandatory mentoring, parades, interviews, and for some victors, exploitation that never officially exists on paper. You're rewarded and imprisoned in the same key. So why build those pretty houses on a hill, separated from the district? Because the relationship between the capital and the districts runs on visible promises. Children see the wealth, but can't touch it. Victors look down on the mines or the fields they escaped, and everyone is reminded the games can make you special until they decide you're expendable again, as the Quarterquell proves. And that's the core insight. The Hunger Games aren't chaotic violence. They're a meticulously engineered rule system that weaponizes poverty, turns hope into leverage, and hides cruelty behind procedures, contracts, and fair odds. Katniss, Peter, Beatty, Johanna, they don't just fight the capital's soldiers. They attack the legitimacy of those rules by exposing how arbitrary they are. A handful of berries, a refused alliance, a rigged broadcast. Suddenly, the law isn't sacred anymore. So here's the real question for us outside Panem. When you see a system that insists it's neutral, procedural, just following the rules, what cruelties might be hiding in the fine print? There is a lot to uncover here, and the next step is to look at what happens when the capital's own tools, its victors, its villages, its symbols, start turning against it. Your turn in the reaping bowl, join the village, or walk away. You've seen the rules laid out. Tesserae quietly stacking the odds against the poorest districts, training scores turning kids into capital betting lines, contracts that keep a victor on stage long after the cameras should cut. At face value, they're just procedures. But here's the real question. Which rule do you think is actually the most cruel, and why? I want the comments to turn into a kind of rule tribunal. Does your vote go to tesserae, where a year of grain costs you extra slips in the bowl for the rest of your childhood? Or is it the game maker's intervention rule, the one that lets them flood an arena, drop mutts, or light a forest on fire the second the games get boring. Maybe it's the post-games contract, where surviving means your family is safe as long as you keep playing the capital story on command. Tell us your district, your reasoning, your personal ranking. There is a lot to uncover here in how you read these rules, and I'm really interested in the relationship you see between what's written down and what's implied as a threat. Because this is where we talk about next steps. If you want to go deeper, we're going to cover specific quarter quells in more detail. The second quell's mass tribute, reaping. The third quell's betrayal of the victor's promise, and how each one rewrites the social contract between the capital and the districts. Or we can zoom in on individual victors' contracts. What it means that Haymitch is forced to mentor every year, or that Finnick's talent is weaponized against him long after his games are over. We could even spend an entire video on one district's rule culture. What does the games look like from District 4's career training halls versus District 12's coal dust and tesserae lines? Why does volunteering feel aspirational in one place and unthinkable in another? Those differences aren't accidents, they're design. If you want more long-form, Victor's village-style breakdowns of Panem's systems, how the houses are placed, why the fences go up, how the sponsorship economy turns survival into a luxury purchase, you can always choose to subscribe, hit the button, or join the community here. And notice that word, choose. Your contract with this channel is completely reversible. You can walk away anytime. No peacekeepers at your door. No threat to your family if you stop watching. That part matters because it throws the Capital's version into sharp relief. In Panem, you don't opt into the reaping. You don't negotiate your mentoring obligations. You don't get to say no to the parade. So I'll leave you with one last question. In a world obsessed with competition shows and reality TV, countdown clocks, and elimination rounds, how far are we really from cheering for a system like the Hunger Games, without ever stopping to read the rules running underneath the spectacle?